Ladies and gentlemen, are we recording? I'm sorry for the late beginning. It is 11:05 a.m. on January 17th, 2019. This is the Assembly Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee meeting, and we'll start by taking the roll. Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Come around this way.
Steve Rebuffo, Port of Alaska.
Bill Paulsey, the Municipal Manager.
Jeff Bull, Port.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance. Austin Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Felix Rivera. Eric Croft.
All right, why don't you go around the room quick.
Jim Jager, Port.
Jane Bourne, PBA.
Trophy, KTVA. Scott Williams, Moradi.
Mike Chadwick, Interlata.
Ron Hampton, Purchasing Department.
Julie Haskett, Chugach Electric.
Matt Clarkson, Chugach Electric.
Arthur Miller, Chugach Electric.
Miriam Albregan, Northern Compass Group.
Andrew View, Alaska Maritime Agencies. Pat Duffy, Pepper Star.
Ryan Smith, Arnold.
Scott Delano, ABI Command.
Ryan Sands, ABI.
Chris Taylor, ABI, SG. Morgan Welch, R&M Consultants. Cody Davenport, Matson.
George Galloway, Madison, Navigation.
Kenny Gill, Matson.
Eugene Haber, Observer.
All right, Tony Slipka.
Alex Slipka, Chief Fiscal.
All right, thank you. And I see Kristen Smith from the mayor's office. And I saw the mayor here a minute ago. I don't know if he's still here. Maybe he's run out. But yeah, so the mayor is also in attendance at this time. So we're going to start with a report from MLP Chugach. A little brief update. Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Mr.
Mine is
Paulsey.
very brief. We did sign the final documents. There's still work to be done on integration and now preparing the filing for the RCA. We're continuing our regular rhythm of meeting weekly, but I think we're making good progress, and it seems like we're trucking along.
So to that end, Julie Haskett with Chugach Electric, we were very happy that we got the documents all signed by the end of the year, and they have been filed informationally at this point with the RCA, just so the RCA has the documents. We are working on the formal filing, working with the MOA on that, which we expect by early to mid-March. And then we continue our integration planning for how to make the two organizations one. And now that we've got through the legal part of the purchase agreements, we're hoping in this first quarter to begin joint planning with MLP employees, so we can really joint plan how this will be one organization. So we're looking forward to the opportunity to get to start planning with MLP. And Arthur and Matt can answer any questions if you have any.
Okay. Any questions from the body? Nope. Any red flags we should be watching for? Things smooth sailing at this time?
Oh, can I ask?
Please, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At one point, we heard that it could close maybe September, maybe earlier. Do we have any sense of when that might be?
That's all dependent on the RCA timeline.
Okay.
If they take their full 6-month period, it could be as late as September. If they move more rapidly, we can move more rapidly.
Thanks.
Our public communication has been fourth quarter of this year or first quarter of next year. So again, like you said, to RCA, and then we got to do our financing. So we don't have a definitive date.
And I might then, that's 6 months plus an optional 3-month extension if all parties agree. So that could be to the end of the year plus then the time for dealing with the paper. So it could be as far as 2 months.
And what's the purchase agreement close by date? Does it state?
It's in 120 days after.
Clarkson.
Yeah, it's up to 120 days after the RCA order.
Okay, so
Up to 120
So
days
it's
after the
kind of-
RCA approval. Yeah, to close.
thank you.
Close group.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so is there any way to try to apply for the loan or the bond money or whatever, financing, to try to lock in an interest rate before the actual final date? Because interest rates could be, they went up like 3 times last year, they could be going up again, we don't know.
Sure, that's something that we are looking at as part of the overall financing plan, to do some type of a rate lock. No decision has been made at this point regarding that, but that is being evaluated in the overall context of the financing of the acquisition.
Right, because of a $1 billion deal, even a 0.25% makes a huge difference.
And that was Arthur Miller from Chugach Electric, and the rates actually came down, which is interesting, over the last month. And
Really?
so they were up a couple points higher, and they've come back down. And so I'm sure bond counsel and the buyer over there is paying close attention to the variables and will make the best deal they can.
And that's part of active discussions with our board as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Fed has signaled their intent for the next 6 months. Other questions? Okay, I think that concludes our report from Chugash MLP. Thank you for
Thank
continuing
you.
to come. We'll have you at the top of the agenda again next month.
Okay.
Looking forward to it. And the next topic on the agenda is the big one, it's port modernization.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Someone can grab the lights for us. We've got 3 speakers today. Myself, I'll just set it up, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Poole from CH2M, and then to Steve Rebuffo at the end. But this is the promised update from the last time we met. So we met last in May 17, 2018. Gave you sort of a review of how we had gotten to where we are with the port. And at that time, I said, we're going to really start building things now. The first thing that has to happen is we have to pick up the petroleum cement terminal and move it. And when we really start building things, we really start spending money. And we were going to start sending you assembly change orders. And that has happened. But there was a big problem. The amount of work that we need to do is more than the amount of money than we actually have. So if no one gives us money, be prepared. We're going to have to come up with some proposal to do this on our own. And the only way to reasonably do it on our own is to change the tariffs that control how much people pay for bringing petroleum, cement, or cargo over the docks at the port. So what have we been doing since then? We've been turning the crank on those. We hope to do it by December. We had a little earthquake. We lost a little bit of time, but we got pretty close. We did it in January. Here's what we're going to try to accomplish today. The first big project is this petroleum cement terminal. We want to give you an update on what the new price tag is for the petroleum cement terminal as we have moved the design from 65% to 95%. We want to explain to you what that movement means for the overall project, and you should all be sitting down for that. We want to talk about how we think we can move forward and preview what we think the tariff proposals that you are going to see in the near term are. So just to reorient ourselves, remind ourselves of what the port looks like, this is what we have now. We have a petroleum, oil, and lubricants terminal, Terminal 1. It also is where we berth the cement. We have a second petroleum, oil, and lubricants terminal. We have Terminal 2, which is often called the Matson berth because it's where Matson goes. Terminal 3, sometimes called the tote berth because it's where tote goes, although they don't own those terminals, we do. And we have the northern extension, the leftover, seismically suspect garbage land from the failed federal project that we have to do something with because we are worried that it might catastrophically fail and wipe out the rest of the port. We also have this south floating dock, which is not labeled, but here, and it becomes part of the story. This is the stuff we really care about. This is the stuff that we use. This is the stuff that is overly corroded and needs to get replaced. And as we have discussed, in order to rebuild all of that while also keeping the port open, we have to start by moving some things. And the first big project is to pick up the petroleum and cement functions and move them further south. So that's where we are now. In order to make that happen, the sequencing has been, we pick up this south floating dock and move it even further south to where you see all the way on the right-hand side. We're going to stabilize the south's backlands, which is some other leftover dirt that we made from the failed federal project and other land improvements that we need to move the petroleum cement terminal there. And then we have to dredge out some of the mud that's in Cook Inlet itself to accommodate ships actually berthing at these terminals. And now we're at the stage where you have already approved, I think, the moving of the dock, the south backland stabilization, and the transitional dredging. The new big bite that is coming down the pike is actually building the petroleum cement terminal. Who's who? Remind ourselves who the cast of characters are. In 2014, we retained a project manager because down at the port, we've got a port director, a deputy port director, a port engineer, but we are not in the business of building ports. We wanted to hire someone to help us do that. That was CH2M Hill. Since 2014, they keep changing their identity. They became CH2M. They're really Jacobs now, but they keep calling themselves CH2M for this purpose. So that's the veil, that's the crown that Jeff's going to wear today. And then CH2M brought in HDR into the project. So the staff of the entire modernization project is really quarterbacked by Jacobs CH2M with HDR by their side. For the petroleum cement terminal itself, the rest of our core team is the designer of record. On May 2017, we brought in COE, so they're actually telling us what we're going to build. And we have an independent cost estimator, Moffitt and Nichols, and we get two signals then. The COE folks create our owner's estimate of what everything costs. Moffitt and Nichols provides another independent cost estimate. And we get a third signal from our sort of kind of part of the team partner, our petroleum cement terminal construction manager at risk, which is Kiewit and Manson. So remember, we procured this not in a traditional design bid build way, but in a construction manager at risk process, which is more expensive initially on the promise that we get more schedule certainty and fewer change orders later. We say, Kiewit Manson, you're on the hook to build this. Help us design it from the beginning. If you have ideas on how things are actually going to be constructed that need to be attended to in the design, tell us now. If you have cost savings ideas, tell us now. We're not stuck with them. At the end of it, they give us a price, we give a price, and if we come to terms, then Kiewit Manson builds it, but we can get on an off-ramp. We can say, we didn't come to terms, someone else is going, invitation to bid. But that's the cast of characters that you may see here. As I now turn the baton over to Jeff to tell us about the updated petroleum cement terminal costs, because this is the next thing that's coming. And I'll say, we have provided a ton of detail here, because I think one of the first questions is going to be, how did the price change? And as you'll see, the important point here is not to get into the weeds about every line item, but to give you a sense that it is a lot of things and no one thing. So I've asked Jeff to kind of move through this quickly, obviously take whatever questions you guys have. But with that, take it away.
Before
Jeff.
we go on, two things. That was the short introduction, by the way. And on the previous slide, you had Anchorage Port modernization. My update.
Got old files.
I know. I'm just saying. I'm channeling Mr. Train.
Yes.
So, please go ahead.
Thank you. As Dale said, we're focusing on phase 1 of the program, which is constructing the new petroleum and cement terminal in the south floating dock, which makes us room to allow us to demolish the first POL terminal and then start the build out in a hopscotch way down the line. In that phase 1, we've got the south backland stabilization, which is essentially armoring the shoreline from the previous program's infill. The petroleum and cement terminal, we've broken up into a number of smaller elements. Ground improvements at the abutment, which was constructed in 2018. The south floating dock relocation and the transitional dredging, which we will perform in 2019 this summer. It's under contract. And then the remaining components, which is the marine terminal and the petroleum systems and the utilities. Way back when, in late 2016, early 2017, we had an all-in estimate of roughly $140 million, and that includes project management, construction management, and design and construction for the South Backlands and the petroleum and cement terminal. South Backlands right now is under contract at $16.7 million, and the petroleum and cement terminal is currently forecasted at $223 million. Yeah. Breaking this down, transitional dredging, we had an early estimate of $13 million. It's contracted at $21 million. And after I go through this, I'll step through each one of these elements in detail for you. South floating dock, we estimated at $1 million. We're at $2.8 million under contract. The construction work we thought was $80 million, and we're at $139 million. And risk contingency, we had some opportunities we thought we would save money at $7.8 million, and right now we're standing at $36 million of risk contingency to address bad things that might happen during construction. Transitional dredging increased $8.4 million. We had a preliminary estimate of $13 million, which was an order of magnitude price that we got from the Corps of Engineers based on their dredging program. And the reason we're doing transitional dredging is the original concept for the program had the petroleum and cement terminal farther out into the inlet, and through the permitting process with the Corps, we were forced to move the facility farther inland towards the shore, which increased the quantity of dredging. We went from roughly 3,000 cubic yards of dredging we anticipated up to 650,000 cubic yards of dredging. We had assumed early on that the Corps would help us out and do this work for us, or potentially partially fund it, because we were working with them to realign the wharf face that worked better with their program. Ultimately, they were not able to support with any funding, nor could they do any of the work which required congressional authorization which deadheaded in Washington, D.C. Right now, our final contract value is at $21.4 million. The larger increase was, the cost increase was driven by a further increase in quantity. We're up to 725,000 cubic yards in our current final quantities. And market conditions on West Coast, there's a lot of dredging work, and the amount of equipment that it takes just drove up the pricing on that. We did look at bundling this work with some other work, specifically South Backlands stabilization and the South Floating Dock relocation, to try to minimize overhead expense by doing more work with the same crew, because it's all the same contractor. So we did what we could do to reduce that cost, but it was ultimately an $8.4 million increase. South Floating Dock relocation, $1.8 million increase. Our preliminary estimate of $1 million was based on 50% of the initial construction cost. We're going to cut off the piling that secures the South Floating Dock, drive new piling in the new location, and just relocate the gangway and the floating dock components. So we took 50% of the initial construction cost as a budgetary number to start with, without any engineering. It was just simply to replace in kind at a new location. Final contracted value, $2.8 million. The replace in kind theory did not meet the current ice force design criteria. It just did not calculate out. We're in with 10 36-inch diameter piles, and we are using leftover pile material from the previous program to try to reduce the cost impact of this. And again, we added this to the transitional dredging work package to try to maximize the amount of work we could get done in the season to reduce cost. The overall construction, the primary marine terminal itself, the biggest piece is $59.3 million increase, broken into a number of different components. Design changes, $29.4 million. The pile installation, $21.2 million. Escalation, $8.7 million. Authorized take exceedance risk mitigation, $3.9 million. That's the plan that we have for working around marine mammals and the endangered Cook Inlet beluga whale species. And then just the cost of piling steel. Design changes, the first one was replacing the existing hose tower, $6.2 million. The original idea early on in the concept back in 2014 is we would build a new terminal and just move those components over to the new terminal. After an inspection of the existing terminal, it's structurally deficient, and the amount of effort it would take to upgrade and reuse it was offset by just procuring a brand new one. The next one was an operational building. The existing operational shack, again, the idea to save money was to just relocate the existing control building that's out there. It's number one, not big enough, and number two, not in a sufficient condition to reuse, so we have to procure that. Fuel piping design, we had an allowance early on in the design phase without designing the piping system. The current budgetary plug numbers are just simply $5.4 million higher. Some of that may be increase in cost of steel. Some of it may be in labor. Right now, that's just a budgetary allowance. The platform square footage increased, which amounted to a $5 million increase, and that was right-sizing the size of the platform to accommodate all of ABI's equipment and all of the equipment necessary for offloading the fuel components. And replacing the emergency trestle with soil improvements. The original concept back in 2015 had us driving extra pile alongside the permanent access trestle. In the event there was a major earthquake, it was assumed that the access trestle would fail due to liquefaction and a landslide, and then we would deploy Bailey bridges to get out to the platform. After realigning the wharf face with our Corps of Engineers permitting process, we looked at that strategy and determined we were far better off spending an extra $2.6 million and improving the ground around the abutment so it doesn't liquefy and slide off, so that we don't lose our primary trestle and have to deploy temporary trestles.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I
Mr. Groff.
don't want to play the whole thing, but I mean, a continuing question is going to be, why didn't CH2 know this before, but I don't want to ask it over and over. I think I'm going to end up doing it. But on platform square footage, why didn't we know on that what size we needed? What changed that said, oh yeah, you're going to need to move your whole thing?
That's a good question of what we've learned as we've gone along through this process. Working with ABI, they've got an existing equipment system. They're intending within the next couple of years to bring in a different piece of equipment to replace that equipment. And so we sized the platform for that piece of equipment that's going to come in a couple of years.
I'm not saying, why didn't CH2 know this before on the dredging component of a couple of slides ago? Did we rely because the feds have often done this in other ports and had done it before, or did we just hope that they would have done some of the dredging money that we thought we could? I understand we had to dredge a lot more than we thought because of the change, but there was also this, we thought the feds would pay and then they wouldn't. Is that because they had promised? They did a lot of other places?
Let me give that one a try. And we have to go all the way back to when we held the very first set of design charrettes to determine what the new look of the port was going to be. And everybody participated in it, all the users down at the port, and the Corps of Engineers. And at that meeting, when we were looking at, we knew that we had to move this petroleum cement terminal anyway, because you need to make room up at the north end to keep the place open for business while you start to build the new. And there, during that charrette process, it was the Corps of Engineers who suggested that if you push it a little further out into the dredging prism that already exists, then there should be no dredging implications to the project. Long story short, a few years had passed and we got more and more into the design process. The Corps changed the way they dredge here. They used to bring up two dredges, a clamshell and a hopper dredge, one that basically drives around and vacuums the cement, vacuums the silt off the bottom. They have now gone to exclusively using a hopper dredge, which means that they needed to ensure that the final design for the dock face alignments accommodated this piece of equipment that they wanted to bring up here that made their dredging operations here more efficient. And in their determination, there would have been angles that were too difficult for the hopper dredge to turn and continue to be able to efficiently dredge the dock face with the dock out where they told us it was okay to put it in the first place. So we had to pull it back. And unfortunately, when we pulled it back, we moved it into an area that's never been dredged before. And that's the dredging that has to happen now.
No, I understand the dramatic increase in the area you have to dredge by pulling that in, or I kind of understand. But I guess before that was we thought the U.S. government would contribute 7 now, or 36, and now they're not going to do anything.
No, that's not true. There would have been a zero requirement for them to contribute anything, because the dock face where we had originally designed it to be would have been where they dredge already.
Can you go back on the?
Way back here.
So in these, I think I know what you're getting at, where we assumed that they would be either completing the work on our behalf or funding part of it. So
it's not dredging; it's other federal contribution on that part, or is it dredging?
It's performing the dredging. So, as Steve stated, in the concept, we thought that the Corps and everybody had bought in with the concept, the alignment, the wharf face, and everything else. When we submitted our permit application, they said, oh, no, we never agreed to that. And we're pretty sure that our equipment can't work with the angle of the wharf face. To issue the permit, we have to do some sedimentation modeling. And if we model it the way it is, we're pretty sure it's going to prove that it doesn't work. But if you'll realign the wharf face, we can do the modeling and we can almost guarantee you we can give you your permit. And so we were stuck with this issue of it takes a year to do the sedimentation modeling. Do we let them go down the road for a year and find out that it doesn't work and we have to realign it, or do we bite the bullet and realign it? And in the discussions, they said, well, maybe we have some leftover funds from the previous year, and maybe we can kick in to help ease the pain and stuff. So it was a collaborative effort to try to how to solve this problem.
doesn't sound like it is anymore.
we ended up holding the bag on everything.
Yeah, it's
I'll let you go. I
absolutely.
know it's a long presentation, but I want to come back to this sort of how we missed it.
Yeah, and it's pretty frustrating for us because we've given all this information to the delegation as well. Asked for some assistance in DC to get the court to operate, and
Thank you,
that's been
Mr.
unsuccessful.
You're welcome. Mr. Dunbar had a question as well.
Yeah, from Mr. Farsley.
Senator. pardon.
Yeah, Senator Farsley. So, I know this is a long presentation. I don't want to derail us too much, but this increase, this fairly substantial increase in cost. I should say first, a lot of this project is necessitated or at least driven by the failure of the expansion, the federally led expansion project that preceded this administration. We are currently involved in very substantial litigation with MARAD, correct?
Correct.
So, will this increase in cost of this project be factored into the damages calculation we seek from MARAD?
Tangentially, and I'll give you more flavor on that as we get to the very end. But
Okay.
the short version to answer the question now is the general thesis of the MARAD litigation is that they took the money that we had that was useful and set it on fire, and they left us with a lot of garbage that we have to clean up.
Yeah.
Whatever the cost of building the petroleum cement terminal ends up being, we never had enough money in the bank to actually complete the project. So one way of answering the question is no, this costs whatever it ends up costing, and the amount of money they set on fire is the amount of money they set on fire. But the other way to answer it is yes, to the extent that these kinds of considerations are informing how much it's going to cost to tear out the crappy land,
Yeah.
yes, that can affect it, but that's more on the margin.
I remember having a conversation with you, Steve, once about not only did that expansion prove useless, it actually proved damaging to the rest of the port facility, right? Because of how it changed the flow of the water or the
Yeah.
sediment in some way. I mean, is that at all taken into is that driving any of these cost increases?
Remedying that is. And
Not at the petroleum cement.
Not at the
Not
petroleum
at
cement
the
terminal,
terminal.
but when you see the overall program cost,
Yeah.
there is an aspect of it that does fix or does remedy that issue.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's part of, and to go back to the litigation real fast, that's part of what it is we are seeking damages to undo.
So that'll be part of the punchline.
Before we move on, I would note this frame of setting money on fire. Much of that money was set on fire by doing design changes, and here we are again. And so my fear is up that we are in fact just engaging in a Groundhog Day scenario where we're walking down the same path that our predecessors did. And I have a quick question on one of the previous slides. You said all of these costs change, and then the PCT category, it was separate from design costs. One of your slides said that design costs were not included. And yet, here we are discussing $30 million of design costs. And so, were they included or are they not? I don't understand how these
That'll show up again too.
It's a good question. These dollars that I'm putting up here are construction costs. So design changes that drove increased cost of our construction.
Okay, so these are specific
These are specifically
costs of
to-
construction related to the
Thank
design
you.
changes that
Thanks
haven't been
for that.
factored in.
Yep.
Because if we showed you a picture of what came out of that charrette, the picture of what it is the end result will be has not changed. But as we get into the cost of construction aspect of these things and all the nuances of building things in Upper Cook Inlet and we're being concerned with resiliency and the like, is where the costs have increased.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Pile length, we increased $4.5 million. One of the changes that was made late in the game was to raise the platform elevation 4 feet to align with the 75-year predicted sea level rise.
Did that change, or that was a number we knew then?
It was not part of the preliminary concept estimate. It was added because we started pursuing FEMA grants and we had to comply with their sea level rise guidance.
But I mean, did the sea level prediction rise, or we just hadn't incorporated it at that point?
Or our previous contractors hadn't incorporated it in their design plan.
Yeah, the designers hadn't incorporated a known predicted sea level rise or the sea level rise change.
You talking about the previous program?
Why wouldn't we have known back then to raise the platform 4 feet for a 75-year predicted sea level rise? One answer is they changed the predicted sea level rise. The other is the designers just didn't?
We had not intended in trying to comply with these federal guidelines because we were not pursuing federal money, but we started pursuing a FEMA grant, which required us to accommodate sea level rise. And we were actually notified that we were awarded a FEMA grant, and for whatever reason it expired. And we're continuing to pursue a FEMA grant to offset this.
We're all trying to do these quickly, but they're
Yes.
important. Why wouldn't we, whether we're pursuing a FEMA grant or not, incorporate in our design the predicted sea level rise for a port?
It was not stipulated as desired by the port.
Thank you, Mr. Croft.
It wasn't something that was overlooked. It was a conscious decision to minimize cost because of this whole issue. We ended up adding it because we were pursuing a FEMA grant. The dredge depth was an issue. The preliminary design assumed a toe wall would be installed if the dredge depth was deepened in the future to a -45 design depth, which is essentially postponing cost to a future date. After negotiating with the Corps of Engineers on the dredging, we agreed to dredge to a -39, but we had to design the piling for -45 unsupported length, which added cost to the structure of the piling. The net effect of the 4 foot of sea level rise and the additional dredge depth essentially equates to a 14 feet statistically of unsupported pile length, which increases the pile wall thickness that's required. So more steel on the piling to accommodate these changes. And then we added 10 feet to each individual pile for construction. We have a target tip elevation for the pile that we drive to, and then we load test these piles. And we looked at if the piles don't come up to their anticipated design strength, we have to splice onto every pile and drive them deeper. And we looked at the cost of the splices versus the risk of not coming up to capacity. And we decided to add 10 feet extra at every pile in case we need to drive them deeper, which is just a risk mitigation strategy. Last one is corrosion control. The preliminary concept was to have a sacrificial steel pile with a reinforced concrete core. The final design, the design concept that the designer went with was depending on the steel piling structurally and not so much on the reinforced concrete core. So we reduced the concrete core on the inside, but went with heavier steel. And to protect the steel, we added coating on the piling of the maximum corrosion zone and an impressed current protection system.
Mr. Constantine?
Yes, Mr. Croft.
Again, mindful of it, but I'd like at some point to pull out, and I think maybe on this or maybe on others, those things that make it last an additional amount of time, right? Make it last 75 versus 50. While you always want to build for a long, long time, with this price tag, I want to know what if we designed it for so that kind of
The
a thing.
resiliency goes.
What if we only got to 50 and in 50 we solved more of the problem then? Again, I'd prefer to do 75. I don't know we can afford
Yeah.
what this is here. So I'd love all of those prices as you, not now, but you can later say, here's the stuff that gets us an additional 25 years or so.
We can get back to, we have evaluated that, we have a
Yeah,
number.
thank
I'll
you.
go back and take another look at that. Pile installation is really the contractor's estimate and our independent cost estimator estimate and our owner's estimate. All three of them had a much larger equipment spread than we had in our preliminary estimate. We had a one marine-based piece of equipment installing these piles. All the estimators felt that it took 2 pieces of equipment, so we've doubled our equipment cost. The original concept was going in at working 610s, and all the estimators felt that 712s was more appropriate, and in some cases they've got a second shift, so they're working a double shift 7 days a week on some operations to get the work all done on time. So by feature, the trestle pile is $4.9 million higher than what we thought it should be. The platforms, $10.9 million, and the dolphins are $5.4 million. So this is just purely an estimator's perspective on what it should take. Escalation, the original estimate was done in late 2016. Now we're looking at going through 2021, so we've escalated year over year. We use 3% per year. Midpoint of construction 2020, we've since updated that. We think the midpoint will finish by 2021, so that's stretching out a little bit more. The escalation at 3%, and yeah, that's it on escalation. Authorized take exceedance risk mitigation, and that's a mouthful. What that is we're using a bubble curtain around the piling when we drive the piling to reduce the hydroacoustic noise signature, which reduces the area that we have to monitor for marine mammals. Because in our permit with the National Marine Fisheries Service, we'll be given a limited number of takes on marine mammals, and it's by category of marine mammal, and a take is anything that changes its behavior. And so, since it's difficult to tell what we change their behavior, anytime we see a marine mammal within the zone that's calculated that we have to monitor, we have to count it as a take. And if we exceed the number of takes that we're given, we're stopped for the year. So it's probably the biggest risk to us as an owner that we have really no control over. So what we've done is add money to deploy a bubble curtain around the pile, which has been shown to be very effective at reducing the hydroacoustic signature, and that reduces the zone that we have to monitor, so a smaller area chance that we incur a take. We've also increased the number of observation stations. NIMS requires one observation station. We're deploying 2 observation stations, one on either end of the project, so we can observe the marine mammals as they come into the zone, and we can stop work before we have to count it as a take. So we're spending the money up front to manage this risk. Steel pile cost, $3.9 million decrease, which is kind of ironic. Steel prices have increased 21% since the original estimate.
How did the
Stay tuned.
steel?
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Trestle piles. That's the little graphic. There's the trestle. So we optimized the trestle. We went from 20-foot spans to 40-foot spans and cut the number of piles in half. But because of the seismic requirements, the pile wall thickness is increased. And we've talked about the height of the piles. The tonnage actually increased by 176 tons for a $1.1 million increase. Platform piles. Again, we traded off increased steel thickness on the pile for the reinforced concrete core as a design solution. We increased the number of piles by 5, which is the additional platform width that we went to. We increased the tonnage by 1,509 tons for an increase of $4.7 million. And the dolphin piles, which are these outermost items there. We optimized the design. We looked at a standard dolphin is 8, a cluster of 8 piles that are battered. We looked at that and we analyzed a 12-foot diameter monopile. It decreased the steel tonnage 4,803 tons for a cost savings of $9.7 million. So, I mean, there's a lot of efforts. You see a lot of increase this, increase that. A lot of efforts have been put in to try to cut cost as well. So this was one success story. So the net is a decrease on steel, even though the cost of steel has gone up. Risk contingency, $43.2 million. When we first did our estimate, we had the platform out in its original configuration. We were having conversations with the Corps about pulling it closer to shore. We knew that there was a cost savings in terms of reduced trestle length if we pulled it closer to shore. So in a risk analysis, you look at what things could incur cost and also cost savings opportunities. So when we plugged in the cost savings opportunities, it offset the increased potential cost for a negative $7.8 million at that time. Right now, we're sitting at a contingency of $35.4 million at the 65% design milestone, and this is with designer input and contractors' input that we didn't have previously. I will tell you, we just finished the 95% risk analysis, and we're at $22.2 million of risk that we think we need to have. So we're trending in the right direction from a risk management standpoint.
Is that on the same project?
Yeah. So these are 65% numbers. We're just now finalizing the 95% numbers. So we went through a number of design refinements. We talked about the Dolphin going to a monopile versus the 8-pile cluster. We looked at the steel piling, and to reduce steel tonnage, we broke the piling into 3 zones: the top third, the middle third, and the bottom third, and we were able to reduce it from 3/4 inch wall thickness, the bottom third, 1.5 inches in the middle, and 1 inch at the top. So we've tried to refine the design within some level of reason to minimize costs. We've reduced the extent of the reinforcing in the concrete core that remains, and there were some shear rings inside the piling. So we've taken a hard look at the pile design because that's the predominance of the cost. And then because we have impressed current corrosion protection, there was a 1/8 inch wall thickness allowance that was being used, and we cut that out. We've since changed the fender system between 65 and 95. We used a fender system design that's similar to what's at the port right now. We've changed to a fender system design that's used at the Nikiski dock. We think it's a net savings of about $2 million, but we're looking for the final IFC drawings to validate that number. But we think the change in the fendering system is going to save money in the initial capital cost, and definitely in a long-term life cycle cost. And again, this is $5 million worth of miscellaneous stuff that we've looked at there between 65 and 95. We have gone through the CMAR process and the progressive design process just to look at are we getting the maximum value from the construction contractor and the interaction with the designer and the construction contractor, and how we adjudicate everybody's estimates. So from a funding standpoint right now, ground improvements, that work was completed in 2018, this past summer at $6.5 million. South Backland stabilization is under contract for this coming summer at $15.6 million. Transitional dredging and south floating dock is $27.9 million. We're looking at 2020 scope of work right now to build the access trestle and the platform piles only. For $65.4 million is the estimated cost. We've got $62.4 million on hand, so we're $3 million short right now for being able to move forward with that scope of work. And then, of course, the balance of construction, which would be finishing the platform, installing all the dolphins, and then hose tower, control room, and all the petroleum system piping in 2021 is currently slated at $113 million, of which we have no funding identified. And these numbers, to answer your other question, these include permitting, construction, design, and management. So these are all in numbers. Okay. This is just a graphic of the 2020 construction season showing we'll build the trestle out to the platform and drive the platform piles and temporarily brace them for the winter of 2020, 2021. The trestle and the platform piles, temporary bracing. And then 2021 is complete the platform, mooring and breasting dolphins, all the petroleum piping and the utilities, and hose tower and control building, and then hook up all the impressed current system. So So our next steps, February next month, we'll finish the design to be complete. We have, we're finalizing the 2020 scope of work estimates right now. Next week, we intend to have final numbers for where we're at. 2021, we've got estimates, but that work can't be let until late in 2019. Just to keep the pricing needs to be closer to the time of execution, so that still has to be finished.
Jeff, we're running so short, maybe I'll just jump through to the next slide now.
All right, next slide. All right, so what does this mean as we extrapolate across the program? A couple of different ways to apply this. One of them is analogous method, and that's to say if the petroleum cement terminal has cost 75% more, then the whole program should cost 75% more. It's not a very precise way of doing it because there's variations between the different projects. There's a selective parametric method, which is to say if a trestle piling on the PCT costs X, the other piling on the other facilities are probably going to cost the same. So it's using a unit cost selectively off the petroleum and cement terminal to adjust the other estimates, and that's what we've done. The other way is deterministic, which is updating all the designs for the future projects and re-estimating them from bottoms up, which is a more detailed and laborious issue. And all these estimates are highly sensitive to funding availability. We talked about escalation being 3% a year. That accumulates pretty quick when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars at 3% year over year over year. And then the marine mammal restrictions and requirements, which is something we can't control either from a permitting perspective or actual experience in the field. So these are the new numbers that we forecasted. You can see we've gone from $1.08 billion to, if nothing changes, we would be at $1.9 billion.
Okay, so we get that information from our project managers, and we go, how could that possibly be true? How can we make that not true? And what do we do about it? So I will begin to step into all of those. The first was to say, we started asking a lot of questions like Assemblymember Croft was asking. What elective choices have we made that move the needle that we can undo? And candidly, we did not get a lot of things that we can undo. The petroleum cement terminal is now at the 95% design, and it is the tail that is wagging the dog for the rest of the project. I think the petroleum cement terminal cost is pretty well baked, although we want everybody to look at it. The books are open. If we are not designing the cheapest, most vanilla port, we need someone to tell us how we make it cheaper. But it does mean that we have to think radically differently about what happens for the rest of the project, I think. So let me do a little bit more of the updated story. I know we're running close on time. The other thing I told you back in May was we didn't have enough money. We have enough money to get through now 1/2 of the petroleum cement terminal. We'll build the trestle to the future, and then we're out of cash. We have to find cash to build the platform to make the trestle actually go somewhere. And one thing that we thought we would explore is maybe public-private partnerships. We're going to get a white knight who's going to ride in and who is going to save us, and we want someone to tell us how that process works. So we went out and we had an RFP process for a consultant to make us smarter about this whole process. We selected Capstan Consulting, and we informed all the port users that we were going through this process. The public version of their report is on the desk and distributed to you. They we asked them to do a lot of things, but the two core things were figure out what it would look like if we have to just go it alone. Nobody helps. We keep asking for the state for money, we've asked DOD for money, we've asked the feds for money. Nobody shows up. We just have to pay for this ourselves. And what might a public-private partnership model look like to take us down a different path? I'm going to do them out of order. I'll do public-private partnership first. But generally, they can lean into the problem. If you are designing a program that is $1.9 billion, you don't have anything close to that amount of money. These are figures from the summer. You got to find $1.8 billion. What is that going to look like? The public-private partnerships that I'll take out of order, I'll say we got a lot of good information about all the different flavors of public-private partnerships. And at some point in the future, we're going to have deep discussions about equip, operate, transfer as compared to design, build, finance, maintain, operate, transfer, or modified DBFOMT. But the punchline was, my hope that the white knight would arrive is probably not true. There are a lot of reasons to do a public-private partnership, and it is definitely something to consider. But what was made clear to us in the discussions is it might not necessarily move the needle at all on the cost realities, because if we go alone ourselves, we as a government borrow money at the cheapest rates you can get in the market, and the return we expect on that money can be zero. We can expect no return. If anybody else rides into this picture with a bucket of cash, they're going to want a market return, and they will have to borrow money at commercial rates. So it may well be that it ends up being more expensive in a public-private partnership model. And in any event, we're going to have to cough up money that presently we don't have. We were advised that it may make a whole lot of sense to do it at Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, in part because it brings the end users into the design process earlier, so we can make sure we are not building a Cadillac, that we are building a Yugo, because that's what we actually want here. And we have approached the users to have these conversations. So we invited the users here. We've sat down with Tote and Mattson. We are open to discussions on T1, T2, what the future of the cargo terminal looks like. We also sat down with all of the main users of the petroleum cement terminal. We're far enough along. I don't think that there's likely to be a public-private partnership solution. And it, again, may not change the needle of the financial realities of the cost of the port and where we're going to have to get the money. But the door is open, and we have conveyed those messages to everyone. If this looks like more than we need, tell us immediately. If you would like to be a partner in this, tell us. We will figure this out all together. This is a community issue. All right, so what does that actually mean then if we have this as our new cost for the petroleum cement terminal, and this is where we are in the program? We've been designing it. We're right up to the step of actually building it, and if we build it, we run out of cash. Here's where Capstan did a deep dive into the revenue bond options. There's not really capacity or appetite to ask voters for a general obligation bond, just pledge the full faith and credit of the municipality, but we could do a revenue bond solution where we change the cost of bringing things across the docks and use that to secure revenue financing. And we went very well into this. The report is available to you. I'm going to leave it for everyone to chew on, but it's going to be not the thing we're ultimately going to focus on. But I'll say that involves a lot of considerations. You figure out how much money you're going to need for your capital expenditure. You figure out when you're going to actually time the cost of your bonds that you're issuing. Then you've got to cover both your capital costs and your debt service costs. You've got to make sure that you're meeting your debt service coverage ratios so the market will actually have some confidence that it can lend you some money and that you won't default. And you've got to make sure that you have enough money every day to actually operate the port. When you roll that all up, you get some pretty chunky numbers. And they gave us two flavors of this. One, they said, if you did it completely on your own, the market may require you to raise a lot of money. If you got someone like the state of Alaska to come in and say, I'm not giving you money, but I will guarantee this debt, meaning that if you default, I, the state of Alaska, will make up the difference, which hopefully should cost the state of Alaska nothing. That could give the markets more confidence. We would have to raise tariffs less significantly because we would need less money to make our debt service coverage ratios. That's a new flavor of the conversation that we are starting to socialize into the world. If the state can't or won't give us capital grants or general obligation funding, the very least they could do is guarantee whatever debts that we're going to issue, and that could materially change the financial picture down at the port.
The
And that's
state credit or credit changes the interest rate, or it changes the ratios, or both?
It changes the amount of revenue that we have to show the market we have annually, because they'll say, oh, well, instead of having a lot of float, a higher debt service coverage ratio of maybe, say, 2, you could get away with 1.
In simpler terms, it doesn't decrease my interest, but it may decrease my down, or what I have to show.
It doesn't change. That's right. It doesn't change the interest, but it changes the amount of income you need to show the bank you have.
Debt to income ratio.
Okay, so we got smarter through the Capstan process, and then we turned to our usual tariff experts, Parrish Blessing and Associates. You know Bill Wilkes, and we'll introduce you to Jane. And Jane, I'm forgetting your last name. Bohr. And they have created further refinements on the tariff process, which I will now hand.
Chair, before we rush through this, we are pretty much out of time, and I think that
We have about 3 slides left.
Okay.
4 slides
Three
left.
to 4 slides left. and
so we
I'll-
may extend slightly into the next committee.
Yeah, we've got a lot to do in that, and I think this is going to have to be more meetings for you, Mr. Chairman, on investing, but go ahead.
Right. Okay.
All right. So our relationship with Paris Blessing down at the port goes back about 9 years. They've done 2 of the 4 tariff changes that I've been associated with down at the port, and they have also done our standalone audit for a long time. So we're very confident they know enough about our business to approach this from a high knowledge area, and they're the ones that created this model that we're going to use to help us figure out what the right rate settings need to be.
So in the interest of time, let's jump through as quickly as we can here.
Okay. So the target is about $200 million. We got 128 from the state. We have apportioned that out along all the phases of the program because we knew that there was going to be design elements needed for everything, and to put it all on the one phase and short sight what was going down in the future would have been the wrong way to do it. So when you look at how we've divided up the use of the $128 million, you can give about $21 million credit to PCT, so which that means we have about $200 million we have to raise. And this is kind of what I said. This is how we've apportioned out the $128 million so that every phase of the project gets a share of that money that we started the whole program with.
Mr. Chair, if I can make a quick motion. I've been advised by the clerk to make a motion to extend this meeting by 5 minutes.
I'll entertain that motion. Thank you. Any objection? Hearing none, continue, please.
Okay, so doing tariff changes at the port is not something new. We've done it. We've done it many times, 4 times in my experience in the time I've been there alone, and the process is the same all the time. One new wrinkle at this go. We've never considered meeting a debt service coverage ratio before because we've never borrowed money to the extent that we're going to have to borrow it now and going forward. So now we have to factor into the considerations meeting a 1.3 debt coverage ratio, and I'll explain where that number came from later. We also have to make sure that we keep on hand 60 to 90 days of operating capital. It's kind of the emergency checkbook fund for if some reason the business at the port isn't meeting finances. We also need to keep on hand about a 2% reserve for those catastrophic infrastructure issues that are unexpected, like storm drain collapses or fenders falling off the dock because of the corrosion issue and those kinds of things. And this is all good policy, and the numbers can change with a little bit of thought, but right now this is what we're sticking with. And this is we need to cover all of the responsibilities laid out for us in any terms and conditions of bonds. And just to kind of keep it fair to everybody, each individual project has to pay for itself. Otherwise, we are finding ourselves refereeing some of the users down there who don't benefit from this being asked to pay for part of this, and vice versa. You got to be a little bit fairer about how you carve the kingdom when it comes to covering this kind of debt.
So you're going to see in the capstone report, the 2 slides I showed you briefly, this presentation is going to be a little bit different, and there are 3 reasons why.
Yeah, and here's the reasons why. Parish Blessing had they have the wherewithal to access the most current information, so they've started with our actual SAP year-end numbers to project forward what they think the requirements are. I mentioned the debt service coverage bill had alluded to the fact that when you look in the capstone document, they're going to be a little bit higher than the 1.3 that we're working with, according to the Hilltop Securities, who's the bond folks for the city. They're pretty comfortable we can get away with 1.3, and we're bringing our increases online in a more gradual slope. In the capstone study, you'll see that they jammed it all in up front. So this is kind of what you're going to, a sample of what it is you're probably going to see as we go down the line. Because what we'll do is come back to you before we even bring to you formally through the assembly process the tariff rates changes that we want to make, so we can have another one of these conversations, either with this committee or in a work session with the whole, or both.
So
however you think it's fair to go
now.
forward.
We got 1 minute, and there are concerns that are needing to be addressed. This is too much information. We need to break this up and come back to this in a committee level. just this report alone.
All right, let me give you the 20-second wrap-up. The current bit is tariff on petroleum would go from about 15 cents a barrel to $1.20 a barrel at the pump. That means right now it's a fraction of a penny. It would end up being about 3 pennies in 2013. Cement
Per gallon, then 0.3 to about 3 cents.
Exactly. Cement is currently $1.60 a ton. It would go to $15 a ton. The market price of a ton of cement is $155. At Lowe's, you pay 8 cents for a pound. It's currently a fraction. It would end up being almost a penny. That's the level of magnitude that it takes to proceed with the petroleum cement terminal on the path that we're on. We're going to come to you after we go to the Port Commission. And then the last question, we are still looking at who else should be paying and picking up these costs. The Fed government, we think at least needs to pick up the stuff that they messed up, and that there is over-design that we're doing because we're a statewide resilient facility. At the very least, the state should pick up. The end.
Right, and but so much information we need to dive into a little more deeply. My questions, just from the top, are did we take those cost projections that doubled in the last quarter and project them across the entire project? Are we now looking at $3 billion for a port improvement? We don't know. We haven't seen it, right? And so are we basing our projects on the previous construction models? Because that raises the question of, are we going to, as we move forward, then find these surprises, double or triple? And these are great concerns for those of us who are in a position where we have to appropriate for this. And so I think we need to dive more deeply into this question before we move to the next question of what are we going to buy, right? So if the previous engineers brought us to the point where we're having to pay BMW prices for a Yugo port, maybe we need to really look more closely at what we're doing.
And Mr. Chairman, do you want to do that in this committee or as work sessions? You want to?
I think we can do some special committee meetings and just kind of boil down as much as we can out of it.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure who's doing it so that you'll schedule the.
Yes. And probably, because I understand there's a timeline with getting a rate question asked, a tariff question asked, we'll try to schedule them in advance of that process so that we can be more fully apprised of the various issues, challenges, and pathways forward.
Yeah,
In the
all the
meantime-
cards are face up. We want everyone to help solve this problem.
Thank you.
And the tariff review and change process is underway, and we're not going to stop it or slow it down.
Right.
To catch up with the information flow piece.
Right, and we don't. What we want to do is be in advance of that process, and so as much as possible.
As much as possible.
Yeah, where we
Yes.
are educated, because if we have to make a yes vote with questionable information, you might find a response you don't want.
Sure.
Yep.
And so we'll take 30 seconds of public comment. If someone from the public wants to speak. Eugene, Mr. Haberman, please, 30 seconds.
My name is Eugene Carhaven. I represent myself. I follow public process. Public process on a pro decision made by the governing body. It's more like a public interest. This is another example where you need to hold your meetings, video, audio, at the USAC library building. The public should hear this kind of information. People see a lot of information that the public is blind to. I respect you in the essence that you're trying to connect the dots as far as what's going on this issue. The public needs to hear it. And by being in this room, the public's not here. And the last part, first presentation was about 41 minutes. There is no presentation materials for that presentation. You need to get that online. The last part was mostly part of that was there.
All right, thank
That's
you.
it.
And we are adjourned. Thank you.